Webinar. My name is Niall Smyth. I'm a technical consultant with A2K Technologies. And welcome to today's webinar, and hopefully you can get something useful from the tips and tricks we're going to cover in the next hour or so. Okay, so let's give a look at our agenda for today. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of A2K Technologies. Give you a bit of background on myself and the kind of work I've done and the work I do with A2K Technologies. And then we'll go through a couple of the most common at the end for questions and answers. And if there's any discussion or anyone thinks of anything, this question that they want to see, or they've always wanted to ask the question, then we'll leave about 5 or 10 minutes at the end to go through that. Okay, just to give a little bit of a background to A2K Technologies. Basically, we're one of the biggest, or we are the largest Autodesk reseller and a platinum partner with Autodesk, which means it's a recognition that Autodesk give to their highest tier resellers. We have a lot of industry experienced staff from a lot of different backgrounds, which means that we've got specialists in all areas of the multitude of software that Autodesk offer, and a lot of different points of view from the different industries we've worked in. Most people associate A2K Technologies with the Autodesk software, but we do other softwares as well, such as all the Microsoft products. We do KnowledgeSmart, which is just like a benchmarking tool to check your standard of CAD knowledge inside in your organization. Things like design content, which does standard content for BIM and Revit programs, as well as all the Adobe products, and we also do hardware for HP. So there is a complete offering from A2K. It's not just CAD. In terms of my own background, I'm a mechanical engineer. I've worked in the petrochemical, biomedical, aviation. We've built some special purpose vehicles for different industries. And with A2K, my main focus is on mechanical design. I have a big interest in simulation technology, such as finite element analysis, CFD, and data management, all the Vault products and things like that. So, as we move along to our main topics that we're going to cover today, the very first topic I'm going to talk about is installing the Inventor Other library. So this is probably one of the most common questions we get asked, is after people upgrade to the latest version of Inventor, they go to Frame Generator or their Content Center, and they realize that they haven't got any of the Australian standards. So the easiest way for me to discuss how to solve this problem is to go through a clip that I've made a recording of, and what I'll do is I'll pause it along the way. Okay, so what we'll do is as it goes through it, I'll pause it at the different sections that we want to stop and talk about. So in this case, we're inside in Frame Generator. You can see that you've got your American National Steel Institute, you've got your ISO, and you've got some custom standards in there as well. So as we move on, we'll see that we obviously want to get our Australian standards into the library as well. So the first step that you do in kind of troubleshooting this issue, I guess, is you'd go to your Projects tab. And we'll talk about the Projects tab in a little bit more detail later on in this webinar. So on your Projects tab, on the bottom right-hand side of it, there's a little Configure Content Center Libraries, which gives you access to the libraries that you have active in your project. So in this case, you can see that all the ones that come with the software are read-only, and there's some other custom ones that are in there as well. But throughout the list, you can't see any Australian standard ones. And the little location in blue up on the top of the screen is where the library files live on your computer. So the default location is Program Data, Autodesk Inventor, the version of Inventor you've installed, Content Center Libraries. So the next step would be to check in there. So when we go in there and we check, you could also see that there's no Inventor Other library, which would be marked as AI for Autodesk Inventor, the year, and then you'd have Inventor and Other in capital letters. So after checking in there, you can be 100% sure that the Inventor Other library didn't get installed with the software. So the next step would be to take out your installation media, which is the USB key, or if you downloaded it, go to the folders where the media files were downloaded to, and run the setup.exe file, which is basically as if you're going to reinstall the software again. But the thing is, we're not actually reinstalling all the software, and you'll see that when we get to the reinstalled screen, that it'll tell you what programs you've installed, okay? And you can drag the little toolbar on the right-hand side down towards the end of the screen, and it'll give you an option to install the Inventor content libraries. So when we get to that screen, you'll see that it'll tell you the libraries that are already installed or that you have installed previously. So the key thing here is you only need to install the libraries that are missing. There's no need to go reinstalling all the ones that are already there, because it'll just basically replace them. So you take the Inventor Other library, and then, whoops, excuse me, give a click in the wrong place. So just drag back to the screen that we were at. And when we get back to after we've picked the Inventor Other library to install, we give a quick check just over the other software. And it's just making sure that we're not reinstalling any software that we don't really want installed. Okay? So with that, then it'll install the Inventor Other library. And it's a gig and a half, or in that kind of size, so it takes a couple of minutes for it to install. And then when you go back into Inventor, you can go back to your Projects dialog box, and on the bottom right-hand side, we go back and we check to see what Content Center library. Oh, excuse me again. That's a bit awkward way I've done that, so sorry about that. When we go back in and we check the Content Center libraries that we have installed in this project, you'll see in the list that we have the Inventor Other library in there, which contains all our Australian standards. And that way then when we go back into our frame generator and our Content Center and our default location for all the libraries, we'll be able to see that the Inventor Other.idcl file is in our default location. And just when we get back to configuring the Content Center libraries that are active in the project, I just want to mention a quick point in that it's best practice to only have the Content Center libraries that you use turned on. And the reason I say that is because every time you go to the Content Center and you go to insert something and nutter a bolt, it'll actually register through all the Content Center libraries that are active in that project. So it'll slow down your process of putting nuts and bolts and using the Inventor Content Center library. So as I said, it's best practice to only select the libraries that you will use. So for example, if you don't use Japanese International Standard nuts and bolts, then you can turn off the Inventor JIS library. Or if you don't use Russian ones, you can turn off the Inventor GOST one, and it'll make your performance a little bit faster again. Okay, so that way then when you go back and, as I said, you go back into your frame generator, you can get access to your Australian standard bolts, or so your Australian standard sections and everything. And I said that's one of the most common problems that people will run into, because oftentimes IT or someone who doesn't really know what libraries should be active install Inventor, and then when you upgrade it, you realize you haven't got access to all the Australian standard stuff. Okay, so the next tip or a section that I want to discuss is, again, it's related to the content center. And it will flow on to the next topic after that then as well. So this topic is how to create a read-write library in the content center. So you might want to do this in the scenario where you want to publish your own section sizes to the frame generator, or you want to publish your own nuts and bolts or your own features and so on to have available to you, either in the frame generator or the content center library. So an example would be perhaps you're building an aluminium structure and you're ordering your aluminium from Caprol, and they have a section that's 69 millimeters by 69 millimeters. So in the Content Center library, it's all the standard Australian standard section sizes, such as 50 by 50, 40 by 40, and so on. There's no 69 by 69. So in that case, you'd have to go into Inventor, create your 69 by 69 section, publish it to your Content Center library, and then you'll have access to it in Inventor. So what I'll do is I'll just switch over to the Inventor application, and I'll talk through what we need to do in this scenario. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go to the bottom right-hand side of our projects dialog box, which we saw in the previous video. And down here you can configure Content Center libraries. So what you can do here is also you can create a library. So the dialog buttons are the buttons on the bottom right-hand side. The second one in from the right, you've got a Create Library option. Okay? And you'll see there that you have a couple of libraries in red. So they are probably libraries that I didn't migrate up and that need migration to get up to the current level. So you've also got a library transfer guide and update tool in here as well. What we'll look at though is create library. So I'm going to create a library. I'm going to call it Top Tips Inventor. Say OK. And I'll make this, if I can see where it went to. There we go. So I'm just checking that it's active and it's a read-write library. So all the default libraries that are installed are read-only. This one here is read-write. So we'll say that means we can basically publish material into it. So we click OK on that and done. We'll just save our changes as we come to exit the project dialog box. So from that we'll open up a new part, and in the new part we'll go to create our section that we want to create. Okay? So perhaps we're putting in 2 rectangles, and let's say our section, again just to keep it simple, we'll make it 69, and I'll make these equal to each other. Okay? And then what I'll do is I'll offset that in, and I'll dimension the offset just to give us our thickness. Okay, so I'll make it a 5 mil thick square section. Okay? And then just constrain up our sketch correctly so that it's not going to go anywhere. And once we've that done, we're ready to create our extrusion. So when I'm creating the extrusion, a nice little feature in Inventor is that when I click on a line after I finish my sketch, I've got the quick access option. So I'll just hit the extrude button, and the length here that I extrude the distance isn't critical, but what is kind of important is up here, instead of actually just putting in a distance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to name my parameter. So I'm going to name this parameter, I'm going to call it length, and I'm going to make it equal to 10 mil. So length equals 10. So what I'm doing is by naming this extrusion distance here, when I go to my parameters table, which is the little FX button up on the top of the screen, and the quick access toolbar, and it also lives in the Manage tab as well. So if I go to the Manage tab, and you'll see there in the Parameters panel, you've got that little FX button as well. So it's like that little equation symbol that you see in Excel. Okay, so when I go to my parameters table, you'll be able to see that we've got a length parameter in there. And that's gone in there because as I've extruded the profile and I named the distance length, it's given me a named parameter. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. The next step is going to the Manage tab, and we want to go to the Author panel. And on the Author panel, at the right-hand side of it, there's a little drop-down menu. And you can author nuts and bolts, you can author tube and pipe, you can author connectors, and at the very bottom is the one we want, which is authoring a structural shape. So what we're doing is, by authoring it, we are basically telling Inventor what parameters are the key parameters to look out for. So I'm just going to save it, give it the default name because I'm not going to use this part again. So when we're authoring it, we're basically telling Inventor how to look at its parameters and where to put those in relation to the Content Center. So the first dialog box we'll see is a structural shape authoring dialog box. We've got category drop-down list, which gives us the categories that are in the Content Center, such as angles, channels, I-beams, other round bars, round tubes, and so on. So we'll put this one into the Other section, because maybe we just want to find it easily. And you'll see that the second tab beside the layout one is parameter mapping. And it gives you a lot of parameters that you can map to Inventor. So we're basically telling Inventor what parameters in our model are linking to these categories or fields inside in the Content Center. So base length is the one that's highlighted in yellow. If it's highlighted in yellow, it means that it's a parameter that has to go in. So basically, I haven't got the option to click OK or Publish Now on the bottom of the screen until I tell Inventor what its base length is. So this is the reason why I named my parameter length, because Inventor needs to know what the length is and what length to drive inside in the frame generator. So when I click on the length parameter here, which is named, so it's easy to find it, click OK, and then I've got the Publish Now option has lit up for me. So I could click OK and publish later, but as we want to go on, we can say we can publish it now. So it's giving me confirmation that it's been authored OK. And now we can pick my libraries that I want to place my custom Content Center into. So I want to place it into the Top Tips Inventor library that I've just created. Happy with the English language. And you can see that when we go to the next dialog box that it's already selected the other category from the structural shapes category inside in the Content Center. So that was from our authoring process, so that's all good. We can click Next. And again, we can map parameters here again if we want. Happy with that. We can say maybe our material is our key column. If you wanted to put in other key columns, you could do that. So that means that if you're placing it from the Content Center, these are the options you'll have to pick. So here we say the next dialog box will give us the information for the family name. So perhaps I'll put in some top tips as the family name, family description, custom section, family folder, standard organization. I can type in what standard organization I wanted it to be, and manufacturer, revision, and so on. So the next screen will show us the thumbnail of what it's going to be. And we can just confirm that we're happy with the thumbnail and then click on the Publish button. And it will give us another dialog box then telling us that the publish is completed successfully. Okay, so what we'll do next is we'll just confirm that that's been successful and we'll test it. So I'll go into my standard assembly. And very quickly what I'll do is, without dwelling on the procedure too much, I'll create a part in place. So this part in place that I'm going to create, I'm going to pick a plane that I want to create it on, and I'm going to put in just a primitive shape. So perhaps a box or a cube. And what I'll do is I'll just double check that those dimensions are sensible, because our section is 69 by 69. So if I don't put in a sensible size, our structure just won't look correct. Okay, so, and we'll give the extrusion a bit more size. Yeah, make it a meter. Okay, so as we pick our plane and we're creating a part in place, it's a little bit of an advanced assembly technique. It allows you to open an assembly and then create parts within that assembly. Okay, and there's two ways to use frame generator. You can use 3D sketches or sketches using 2D planes, or you can actually use the way that I'm doing here at the moment, and that's creating a solid. But the key thing is when you're at the assembly level is that we don't want this solid to appear as a part in our bill of materials, and we also don't want this to upset our eye properties. So we don't want it to be taken into account for our mass. We don't want to consider this big block in our mass calculations. So what we do is we go into our bill of materials, and we can go into our model data tab, and when we go into our model data tab, we can click on the bill of materials structure. So this is a very useful little functionality as well inside an Inventor. You can set it as normal, which is just, it'll appear on your parts list. Inseparable would be like for a welded material. So you only want this assembly, you don't want the actual parts of the assembly showing up in your parts list. Purchased would be, for example, you're buying an axle for your machine. The axle may come with a hub and a wheel. So you'd say it's purchased. You actually don't want to include a drawing of your hub, and you don't want to include drawings of your wheels. You just want a drawing and one item on your parts list. Phantom is if you're making assemblies to make it easier for you to model. So maybe you're structuring certain things just for modeling purposes, and you don't want them to appear as assemblies in your parts list. Then you can use the Phantom bill of material structure. And you can also use reference. So reference is what we're using here. This block is going to be our reference part, and we don't want it appearing in our bill of materials, or we don't want it being included in our mass calculations. So when we go to our frame generator and we go to insert a frame, you can see here that we've got a standard called A2K, which is the one I've just created. Our family is our top tips custom section. And we've just got one member in there, which we didn't actually give it a name. So then I can pick on all the edges of my reference part, click OK. And we just insert those frame members. And then very quickly we'll just do a quick check using our right click and our quick access menu. And we'll check the minimum distance. And we can see there that it's 69 by 69. And typically, if you're creating framework in Frame Generator using a reference part, what you do is you'd change the reference part's visibility. So we can click on it, and we go to our visibility or appearance menu up here, and we give it an appearance something like clear blue. So it makes it very easy then to continue using the miter functionality using your trim, and it's fairly obvious then if anyone opens the model that this part is just a reference part. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll switch back to the our PowerPoint again, and we'll give a look at the next topic that we want to give a look at. So we've seen a couple of things in what we've done there. We've looked at creating custom libraries, so that we created a library called the Top Tips Inventor, and we published in a custom frame section in Frame Generator into it. So it's a pretty good topic, and it's something that's asked very, very frequently, and something you kind of need to do as well. The next topic I'd like to give a look at is our Inventor project settings. Okay, and this is, we kind of touched a little bit on this when we configured our Content Center libraries. We looked at what libraries our project was working with. So I'll go back into Inventor again, and I'll go back to close down the assembly that we have just finished, and close the part as well. Okay, so I'll close this part as well. And I don't need to save the changes to that section part because it's been published into my Content Center library. And when I go over, once that closes down, I can go to the Get Started tab, and then I can open up my Projects dialog box, and we'll talk a little bit about the different settings. And I won't spend too long on this section. We'll just give a look at some of the key things and mention a brief description of what each one is. So on our Projects dialog box on the bottom half of the window, the very first entity we've got is a single user. So if you're in a Vault environment, you can have single user or shared users. What I do recommend is instead of having multiple project files, just have one project file. That's the best practices. And down the track, if you look at getting into Vault more, having one project file is much more beneficial and much easier to manage your data. The reason I've got multiple ones is because we work with different training data sets and demo data sets and so on. Okay. On our project settings, when we look down, we've got a little object called Use Style Library, and it's set to read write. So we can set this to read write or read only, and this will be important for a later section. Okay, so just looking at some questions that are popping up as well. So sorry about that, Elliot. I missed. You just put it in 2 minutes ago. But what I'll do is I'll leave a section at the end. So if people think of questions, type them in, and we'll have a section at the end for questions and answers, and we'll try and go through them all. And if there's any other section or any other questions that people think of at that time, you just punch them in, and we'll work through them at the very end. Cool. So back onto the style library, you've got read write, read only option. So if you want to edit the style library, and this is useful if you want to change your styles in your drawings, so you want to change your templates and so on, then it has to be read write. So if you want to store all the styles, such as custom line weights, text sizes, things like that, make sure it's to read write, and then you can save it into your library as opposed to saving it into the document. Next section down is the appearance libraries. So you can create custom materials and custom appearance libraries, and you can tell Inventor where they are and which ones you want to work with. The next one down is our workspace. And the workspace location, when we right-click, we can edit it if we like, and you can tell Inventor where your workspace needs to be. That basically defines the default location for new files. So as you create a file or an assembly or a drawing, it's going to automatically go to try and save it into your workspace. You can only specify one workspace per project. The next one down is our workgroup search paths. So, for example, you've got multiple people working in a project, and they're actually referencing folders in different drives and so on and things like that, or folders in different projects, which can get a little bit messy, and I wouldn't recommend you doing it a whole lot. But that's what you can do in there. You can basically specify locations for files on a server or a network drive to be accessed by users working on the same project. Okay? The next one down is a library file location. So when you right-click, you have the option to add a path. And what that means is it enables you to specify a location of typically custom parts that are read-only. So parts that you don't want edited. So for an example is if you're building aircraft and you've got aviation grade fasteners, you might have those fasteners in 50 different designs. But you don't want to, you only want them in one location. So you don't want people changing a design of any of these parts because it will affect 50 different designs. So this is where you put commonly used parts that you don't want edited because they're shared across multiple designs. So any folder location you add to the library path, Inventor will see it as read-only. So if you want to make changes to parts in there, then you either have to activate another project file or open the part from another Windows location. Basically copy the part out of there, change it, and then paste it back in. So there's a couple of different options. Or you can just specify another project file, point it to your library location, and don't have it as a library location in that second project file, which you could call maybe library editor or something along those lines. Frequently used subfolders. It means that if you want to create subfolders in your workspace, such as a subfolder for your parts, a subfolder for your assemblies, a subfolder for your drawings, you can create substructures in there. With the Windows kind of functionality of being able to organize things by file type, date modified, and so on, I tend not to use that a whole lot, but some people do like to put another level of organization into their workspace. The next option down is our folder options. So if you're working in an organization where you've got one project file and you want everyone to be looking at the same template location, you want everyone to look at the same design data location, and you want everyone to work off the same content center file store. What you do is you set all your default locations here in your project file, and then you make sure that everyone in the work group is working off the same project file. So it's similar for Vault in that you could potentially have your design data in your Vault workspace location or on a server location. And here is where you tell Inventor where to look for your templates, your content center, and your design data. Okay, so there are the objects that I wanted to go through in the project settings. Again, there's often questions asked on what these do, or if there's a conflict between the project file and the application options. So you can see here that our folder options are all default. What that means is when we go to our tools and application options and we go to the file tab, it'll mean that the project file is going to look in this location for our design data, our templates, our content center files. And these can be different for each user in a work group. So by using the project file to specify where these locations are, you're making sure that you've got consistent folder locations and everyone is looking at the same templates and so on. Okay, so if we switch back again to our presentation, the next topic is, again, one of the most commonly asked questions we get. It's actually a very important topic. So as I jump back into Inventor again, what I'll do is I'll just open up a new drawing. And what I'll do is I'll open up using the standard template. So let's say we're using the ISO.IDW. And in here, we're going to go place a base view. And I'm going to place a base view of a part that we are working on. So maybe this fixture drill. What I'll do is I'll place a couple of views in here. And we create. Okay, so that's our default settings when you get Inventor out of the box. You might want to change this a little bit. And what I mean by that is, if I do the very same thing, and I work with another drawing template that I have, and this drawing template is set to different styles and standards. So I just do the very same thing again with a different template, and we'll give a look at our drill fixture again. Oops. I want to create the exact same one, so what I'll do is I'll just go projected view. Create view, projected view. Okay. The orientation of the placements are a little bit different, but what I want to highlight is when we go to our view tab and we say tile all, we'll tile them vertically. When I zoom in on similar parts, so you can see quite clearly that the line thicknesses are different. Okay? So the one on the right-hand side, the line thicknesses is lighter, whereas the one on the left-hand side, you've got really heavy line thicknesses. So again, we'll look at our dimensioning, and we'll just dimension a part on each one. And we'll see that the one on the left-hand side has a particular dimension style, and the one on the right-hand side has a different one. Okay, so let's say you want to customize your drawings to be in line with a certain standard, like Australian standards, or a particular client who gives you a drawing standard, and you want to modify it, or for a particular reason, maybe you want a standard for marketing drawings and a different standard for your shop floor. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go into the one that's the default one, and I'll show how we can change this standard. Okay, let's say we want to change our line thicknesses and our dimension style. So the first thing that we needed to do was, when I go to Open on Projects, we need to make sure that our project settings are set up correctly here. So we go to Use Style Library, and we make sure that it's set to Read Write. You notice the options are grayed out for me. The reason is because I've got files open, but it is set to Read Write. If I needed to change it, I'd close the drawing files that I've opened, and then I'd select Read Write. Okay, so that's all looking good. Next step is we go to the Manage tab, and we look at our Stiles Editor. So on the Manage tab, we've got Styles and Standards panel, and we click on Stiles Editor. So if you haven't seen this before, it can be a little bit daunting, but it is pretty straightforward. So what you've got up on the top left-hand side is the standard that the drawing is working with at the moment. So you'll have a default standard ISO in brackets, and that's the one that's active. Over towards the right-hand side of the dialog box, we've got a drop-down menu, and we can change it from active to all styles. And then when we go to our standard drop-down, you'll see that we've got a lot of different styles that we can work with, or standards, excuse me. So a standard basically consists of different styles. So at the moment it's a default standard ISO. So I want to modify this, and instead of modifying the one that comes out of the box, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on right-click, and it'll give me the option for New Style. And I'll call this Top Tips Webinar, and it's based on the ISO standard. Okay? You'll see that the default standard ISO is still in bold. So I can double-click on Top Tips Webinar, and that means now that's the active standard. And for this active standard, I can look at things. So at the moment, you can see when I move the dialog box down a little, you can see in the background that our dimension style has got a comma as a delimiter, and it also goes to two levels of precision, so 54 point, comma 54. So I only want to go to one. I don't even want to go to a tenth of a millimeter. I just want to go to the millimeter. So I can do things like on our general standard tab, so you can see standard Top Tips Webinar here. I can set the decimal marker as a period instead of a comma. I can do things like character exclude list for views and so on. I can change my view preferences, so Australian standards tend to work with third angle as opposed to American, which are first angle, so third angle is what most people work with. We can look at available styles. We can also look at object defaults. So this object defaults means it's basically looking at all these other styles for these particular objects. So when I say object, what I mean is if I edit this, I can filter via dimension objects. So it's a little bit of programming lingo that's coming in here. Inventor is saying that the linear dimension is an object. Using our Top Tips Webinar standard, our linear dimension looks at the default and in brackets ISO dimension standard. So we can click here and we can change what it uses by default. So let's say we go to our dimension object over here on the left-hand side, and we'll expand it, and you'll see that you've got all the different dimension standards. So we're working with the ISO one. So again, what I'll do is the exact same thing as I did with the standards. I'll right-click and I'll say New Style, and I can call this again Top Tips Webinar Dimension style. So you'll notice that instead of changing any of the default ones, what I'm doing is I'm copying them first. And that's good practice no matter what you're doing or changing, in that you don't want to change the original, make a copy, then change it, and then you kind of have a backup to go back on if you do muck something up. So with the top tips webinar dimension style, I can say, again, my decimal marker is to be a period as opposed to a comma. I can set my precision value to 0. And you can do things like set your alternate units, your display in terms of color, text size if you want it, tolerance, and so on and so forth. So we're just changing our precision to 0. So we've changed that. But this is the key step as well. We need to go down to our object, save edits, save our changes as we go. We need to go to our object defaults. And this is the kind of tripwire most people tend to forget. We can go to our object defaults ISO, do the very same thing again, and we'll say new style. And again, I'll keep my naming convention for top tips, webinar, and we'll say OK. So with this object defaults, it means we basically we can group sets of styles together. So we can go to our object defaults and we can say dimension objects. For this particular top tips webinar object defaults, we want our linear dimension. Instead of referencing the default ISO style, we want to change it, and we want to change it to our top tips webinar dimension style. Okay? So again, we save as we go along. We go back up to our standard. We check our top tips webinar. Check our objects defaults up here. And we can see that our active object defaults is top tips webinar, so that's our group. We can use it by other ones. And we can check here then that our linear dimension has been set correctly, so all good. We click done, and we'll just test it. We'll go annotate, dimension, and we put in a second dimension right beside the 54,54, and you'll see there that we've changed it. It's no longer giving us the 2 decimal places precision. And if we wanted to change the color and so on, we could change that as well. So let's do a second change. So let's delete our dimension here. And let's make our second change. Our second change is our line weights. Let's say we don't like this kind of the thicker line weight, which I think is about 0.5 millimeters. Let's say we want to change it to 0.25 mil. Oops. So again, what we do is we go to our Manage tab, our Stiles Editor. And when that dialog box opens, we can go to our Layers style. And when we go to our Layers style, it gives you basically the layer that is used for lots and lots of different parts of your drawing. Okay? So when you'll be able to see it, you'll be able to see that you can look at layers for symbols, titles, so on. The one I want to change is my visible ISO layer. So when I click it on the left-hand side, you'll see that it highlights in blue on the right-hand side. So again, I'll follow the exact same methodology that I did previously. I'll have copy of visible ISO, and I'll change it to top tips, layer, visible, just so I can recognize it. Okay, so when I've created my new style, it's the same idea again. We go back up to our, save. We can go back up to our top tips webinar, and before we check our object defaults up there, we'll go back to our top tips webinar object defaults down here. And we'll make sure that our new layer that we want to work with is set correctly. So let's say we want to look at view objects, and we scroll down, and we are up in this case, so it's alphabetically ranged from the top down, and we look at our visible view edge, and we can see that the layer it's looking up is visible ISO, so we can change that to top tips layer visible. And what I'll do is I'll just double check that I've changed that layer, because I think I missed a little step in terms of not actually adjusting the line thickness. So I'll go back into my my top tips, save my changes as I go. And you can see there that the line weight was still set to 0.5. So as I mentioned earlier, I want to change that to 0.25. We'll click Done and say yes to our changes. And let's place another, okay, let's double check that we've got everything set correctly. So our top tip layer is visible, that's there, and we'll double check our object defaults, which is our top tips webinar, if I can see it. Oh, there it is. And our visible view edge, top tips layer visible, and we'll go back here to objects defaults and just double check everything is looking from the same thing. So we'll say done, and we'll try placing another base view. Create, and you'll see there that we've changed the line thicknesses. So when we compare these, the left-hand view by the right-hand view, you can see there's a noticeable difference. So our change has been successful. If we wanted to change different views, you can also, as you're placing them on the format up here, you can pick layers and styles. But I haven't that set up, but as you're placing them, you can change your layers and styles. You can say edit layers and so on as well. But what I want to focus on is, let's say we've made our changes and we're happy with that. Let's go back to our Manage tab on our Styles and Standards panel. So we want to save our changes. Instead of just saving them on this document here, we want to save our changes to our style library so everyone else can access this template. So what we do is we make sure that we have read-write set on our style library. Then we can hit Save, and it'll tell us we're going to update our style library with these particular changes. And you can say Save to Library if you like, Yes to all, and then OK. And those changes will be made into your style library. And that means you can access that style library from different machines if your style library is in a shared location. Okay, so there are kind of commonly asked questions that keep coming up, and they're very important as well. Because you want to have your line thicknesses set correctly, you want to have your dimension styles set correctly, you want to have your text size correctly, and so on. Okay, the last kind of tip that I wanted to give people was, when you're looking at really good performing companies, they tend to automate a lot of their process as much as possible. They use things like iLogic, iFeatures, iAssemblies, but they also use software to automate the workflow. So there's a product that I've talked about lots and lots to different people, and to me it's kind of a no-brainer. So this product is something I think if you're using Inventor and you have lots of models, you really should get your hands on it. It's not that expensive. It's designed for creating technical documentation, publications, and so on. But the beauty of it is, it's called Inventor Publisher. The real beauty of it is you can publish all your models and things to iPads, mobile devices, and you've already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars developing your models. So why not get your hands on kind of Inventor Publisher, and you can leverage a whole lot more value from it. And it's not a expensive product, but again, the sales guys will give you more information in terms of costing and so on. And where it's been used in service manuals. As I said, sales guys use it. They can go to a client, and on their iPad they can show, okay, this is how you disassemble a machine, this is how you reassemble it, and this is how it will look like. And it's like having a 3D model on your iPad or your mobile device. And you can see there it goes through different views. And this can be linked to your Inventor model. And I'll do just exit the presentation there. and we'll go to the Publish option, just to highlight some of the cool stuff you can do with it. So this can be linked to your Inventor model, so as changes get made to your Inventor model, your Publisher model gets updated. And you can then publish your storyboards that we just saw there to different formats like Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, and the images that are published to the Word file or the PowerPoint file, they get updated as well. So you can actually update static images. So it prevents you having to do constantly print screen, cut, paste, and then the design changes, you have to replace all your images. So it really is taking a step in that more automated process. You've also got a really good functionality here. You can publish it out as Adobe PDF. So what that does is, I'll just flick back to my desktop and show a file that show that exact file that I've published as a 3D PDF. So this is Adobe Reader, which is the free version. So in Adobe Reader, you can get a 3D model, and you can see I can rotate it about. I can look at it. I can zoom in, zoom out. So people don't need to download Inventor Viewer. And each of the steps that we saw in that little animation are also published out. And anywhere along the line, then people can rotate around, zoom in, zoom out, and so on. And the beauty is that you can't actually take measurements from it. So all your IP is protected. And you've also given your clients or your project stakeholder a model they can review and look at. And as I said, you can publish it to mobile devices, which is a really good way of leveraging more value from your engineering models and getting them into the kind of marketing and sales tools. Okay, so that's pretty much the top tips that I wanted to go through today. There's some, hopefully you've got some, picked up some things from what we've covered. And I'll just leave a couple of minutes for questions and answers. Elias has put in a question, how do you set the parameter to insert the custom part as a specific length? Okay, so what you're saying is to put in a custom length from a frame that goes into Frame Generator. And what I'll do is, rather than going through it, I'll actually get back to you online on how to do that. You just go into the family table and you make a change to the equation that defines the length on the part you've just published to your custom library. So what I'll do is I'll come back to you offline on that, Elias, and I'll send you on a procedure, because it does take just a couple of minutes to get through it. So Gordon has asked the question, what's the difference between Inventor and Inventor Fusion? So that's straightforward. Inventor is a detailed 3D modeler. You can get drawings from it. So to build a part in Inventor, you create a sketch, and then you extrude it to make a profile and so on. And you've got a feature history. So you could go back and you can modify the sketch. You can change things. Fusion is what's known as a free-form modeler. So basically you can pick on a face and you can just pull it and drag it and move it. And you don't actually get a history with it. So after making your part in Fusion, it can be a bit more tricky to go back and change sketches and so on and so forth. But it's very useful for making quick edits to parts that are either stack format or step format, because it means you don't have to go back. You can just click in an edge, drag it, make it larger, make it smaller. And it's a free-form modeler is what it's known as. An interesting point is with 2014, Autodesk have given you they've released Inventor Fusion 360, which is an online application. So I don't think it's in the product design suite. It comes with, I think, some of the functionality built into Inventor, but they're moving it to more an online application. I'll just leave another couple of seconds, I guess, for any more questions or anything that some people would like clarified. Okay, so if you do think of something, just type it into the little dialog box on the bottom of the control panel for GoToWebinar, and I'll do my best to answer them. So the next couple of webinars that are coming up might be of interest to you. We got a webinar on creating point cloud models for road design, a webinar on BIM 360 on the 3rd of October, and then we've got an AutoCAD tips and tricks, which will be quite useful as well, I'd imagine. So if there's no more questions, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for your time, guys. Really appreciate it. And hopefully you've got some benefit from our webinar today. Until next time, talk to you then.